Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1020 for September 3rd, 2023. Coming up in a few minutes.
The results were shocking but not surprising. Within the industry, we talk about the issues that women face quite a lot. We are all aware of it, and I've had several messages from people saying exactly that. Not surprised, but we're really glad that now there's data attached to our experiences.
It's sad that in 2023, a lot of people still hold antiquated views about the role of women in the world of whiskey. A new survey from the Our Whisky Foundation brings that reality home. In fact, 81% of women working in the whiskey business have been asked if they actually like whiskey. I'll talk with Becky Paskin of the Our Whisky Foundation about the survey later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Robin Redbreast? You may have seen me around. Face label, label face. Yeah, that's the one. I'm now contractually obligated to be their spokesbird. Yeah, my agent didn't read the small print.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
How about a really great 12-year-old Scotch whiskey? I have a stellar recommendation coming up for you in just a minute. Spoiler alert, it's Dewar's 12-year-old.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Heaven Hill reached a key milestone this week in construction of the new Heaven Hill Springs Distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky. A crane lowered the 60-foot-tall Vendome still into place in two pieces Thursday. That clears the way for the roof to be installed and the rest of the distillery to be built around the still, according to Heaven Hill Master Distiller Connor O'Driscoll.
It'll be another third on top of what we're producing at Bernheim. So another 10 million proof gallons a year. I think the capacity is obviously one thing. We wouldn't be building this if we didn't need the capacity. But historically, I think the headline is it's Heaven Hill's return home to Bardstown. I mean, obviously, so distilling, we're bringing Heaven Hill Distilling back to Bardstown for the first time since 1996, and I think that resonates with pretty much everybody in Heaven Hill. The Bardstown community, city, county government. It's a momentous occasion. So that's a huge part of the story.
The new distillery is set to go into operation by the end of next year and will have an initial production capacity of 150,000 barrels of whiskey a year. That's a third of what Heaven Hill produces at the Bernheim Distillery in Louisville. Back in May, we talked with Andy Nairn about the planned Witchburn Distillery in Campbellton, Scotland. Now there's word that Argyll and Bute Council has given planning approval for the project, which will convert vacant buildings on the former RAF Machrihanish site. It's just one of three new distilleries planned for the Campbellton area, and the decision clears the way for construction to get underway. Like the Heaven Hill Springs Distillery, Witchburn is expected to begin production late next year. Chivas Brothers is investing £60 million to make its distilleries carbon neutral by the end of 2026. The company will install electric boilers to replace diesel fuel-powered ones at its distilleries, along with installing heat recovery technology. The company has already pledged to make its carbon-reducing technology available to its competitors. The move comes as Pernod Ricard reported its annual earnings this week with a 10% increase in global sales. Chivas Brothers sales were up 17% on strong sales for Royal Salute and Chivas Regal, while Irish distillers reported an 11% increase over the previous year on record sales for Jameson Irish whiskey in Asia, South Africa, and global travel retail. Glen Grant is releasing the distillery's oldest official bottling on record. The 70-year-old Devotion celebrates the late Queen Elizabeth's 7 decades on the throne, with one decanter for each decade of her reign. The first decanter will be auctioned by Sotheby's online between September 11th and the 22nd, with the proceeds to be donated to the Royal Scottish Forestry Society. Meanwhile, Bowmore has unveiled the latest offering for the upcoming Distillers One of One charity auction next month. The 55-year-old stack is the oldest Bowmore release ever and comes in a 1.5-liter hand-blown decanter designed to look like one of the Isla Cliffs. It's expected to bring a high bid of between $300,000 and £500,000 for the Distillers Charity Youth Action Fund. We'll have more on the auction next time around. Back in July, we reported on Uncle Nearest's contest to let whiskey consumers decide which 5 states will be the first to get the new Uncle Nearest single barrel when it comes out this week. The consumers have spoken, and Texas, Tennessee, Idaho, Illinois, and Florida won out, according to Kate Jerkins of Uncle Nearest, who acknowledges that Idaho was a bit of a surprise.
It was anybody's game, right? It was anybody's show. And so, Idaho is it was an interesting state, but it showed us that we've got some people there. So it was pretty fun to see. I think that, when you give, like we were just saying recently, you give America the choice and everybody had a shot, and Idaho is one of them. And I think you can see also that the South has had, the South, maybe isn't talked about as much, but they're big supporters of ours as well. So, but I mean, I will tell you 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I mean, it was really, really fun to watch. It was fun to see people engage in it. And now it's fun to get these single barrels rolling.
Until now, the Uncle Nearest single barrel has only been available at the distillery and through online retailers. It'll carry a recommended retail price of $89.99 a bottle. I'll have my tasting notes for it in a few minutes. Finally, some awards to mention. The American Distilling Institute named Texas's Garrison Brothers Distillery its Distiller of the Year during awards presentations the other day at the ADI conference in Las Vegas. And the Bourbon Women handed out their Women in Whiskey Awards during the annual Symposium last weekend in Louisville. Becky Harris of Catoctin Creek was honored with the Legacy Achievement Award for her years of service to the industry. Alex Castle of Tennessee's Old Dominick Distillery was named Master Distiller of the Year, and Heather Green of Texas's Milam and Green Distillery was named Master Blender of the Year. We have a link to the complete list of award winners in the show notes for this episode at WhiskyCast.com. That's also where you can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. Whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Time now for the events calendar and our look at upcoming whiskey events around the world. I'll be in Charleston, South Carolina this coming Saturday for the Highwire Distilling 10th anniversary party. In the meantime, tickets are still available for the Blue Run Spirits dinner this Wednesday at Bourbon's Bistro in Louisville, Kentucky. Whiskey X Nashville is this Thursday evening. Maltstock is this coming weekend in Nijmegen, the Netherlands, along with Whiskey Herbst in Berlin, Germany, the Midlands Whiskey Festival in Birmingham, England, and the National Whiskey Festival in Aberdeen, Scotland. Bourbon and Beyond takes place September 14th through the 17th in Louisville, just up the road from the Kentucky Bourbon Festival in Bardstown. Whiskey Palatina takes place on the 15th and 16th in Eiseltham, Germany. Those are just a few of the events on our calendar at WhiskyCast.com. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it, and we'll add it to the calendar at the website and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Gabriel here. The new Dewar's 12-year-old has been completely remastered to be richer, smoother, and more balanced. It's a total winner. It's double-aged in first fill premium bourbon casks for greater depth and breadth of flavor, with notes of apples, lemon zest, and spicy and floral notes with a long, smooth vanilla finish. The experts agree too. It's winning awards like pros sink putts. In fact, WhiskyCast's own Mark Gillespie gave it a 94-point rating, which is pretty amazing for a 12-year-old Scotch. It's also earned a 94-point rating from Whiskey Advocate. That makes it their highest-rated 12-year-old Scotch whiskey. It's an excellent testament to the skill, craft, and refinement of the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's. Drink responsibly. Copyright 2023 Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Do you even like whiskey? It's a question you probably would not ask of a man drinking whiskey, but it's a question women get all the time. A new survey from the Our Whisky Foundation found 8 out of 10 women working in the whiskey industry have gotten that very question while doing their jobs, or even while trying to enjoy a dram. The survey also found high levels of bias and sexual harassment within the whiskey industry. I talked with the Foundation's Becky Paskin about the findings this week. Give me the background behind this survey. What prompted you to conduct it in the first place?
We, as the Our Whisky Foundation, were presenting a seminar at Tales of the Cocktail. And this seminar, we wanted to talk about the work we're doing at the Our Whisky Foundation, rooted in the some of the challenges that women face within the industry. We wanted to bring some of these to light for people coming to Tales, which is an industry event held in New Orleans. It's mostly for the bar industry and the drinks industry. So as part of that, we conducted a survey to find some of our own data that we could use for our presentation. We titled it, "Do You Even Like Whiskey?" because that's a question women in the industry are asked all of the time. It's kind of an inside joke, but we did actually want to find out how often women are asked that question. So this survey was supposed to just be for our Tales presentation, but when we had 600 or so responses and we looked at the results, we couldn't just keep this to a room full of people. We needed to publish them and show the world exactly what's going on within the whiskey industry.
And what did you find?
The results were shocking, but not surprising. Within the industry, we talk about the issues that women face quite a lot. We are all aware of it. And I've had several messages from people saying exactly that. Not surprised, but we're really glad that now there's data attached to our experiences. There's no longer the argument that this isn't an issue within the whiskey industry, that sexism doesn't exist. Here's the data that proves it. So what we found, sorry, I'm going to read off some of these. You might have to cut that a little bit while I say that. I never remember them all. Right. What we found, we had over 600 global responses, and of those 600 people, 70% have experienced inappropriate or sexual remarks while at work. 33% of them have been inappropriately touched while doing their job. And that figure rises to 44% when women are in consumer-facing roles. They've been inappropriately touched. A whopping 3/4 of respondents said that they felt discriminated against on the basis of their gender. And a lot of this, we wanted to get to the root cause of why there was so much discrimination and attitudes towards women in the whiskey industry in particular. And we believe that it's rooted in unconscious bias. So we asked them about a lot of this. Now, about 80% of the respondents work in consumer-facing roles. So they're conducting things like tours and tastings and working behind bars. And of those women, 9 in 10 have been spoken over or had their knowledge questioned. 83% have had customers preferring to speak to a male colleague. Now, these are obviously rooted in unconscious bias, and this is all rooted in unconscious bias around this fact that whiskey is a man's drink and that a woman couldn't possibly know anything about whiskey. Now, they manifest as microaggressions, which are just small little comments or attitudes, but actually can build up to have quite a devastating effect on women. Imagine having just one comment made to you or one person speaking over you and going to speak to a male colleague instead. You'd probably shrug it off and think, oh, well, that's just a dickish move. But imagine that happening to you every time you get in front of consumers over many days, weeks, months, years in the industry. It builds up. And, having spoken to women in the industry, a lot of them feel deflated, exhausted, tired by this attitude. And I know that the whiskey industry is doing a lot of work to be more inclusive and to do a lot of work and improving the representation of women in marketing and communications, which obviously impacts how people consume those, how people perceive those who are drinking whiskey and making whiskey and talking about whiskey. But our survey showed that only 16% felt the industry was actually doing enough to change whiskey's masculine image. So it's still a problem, and one that I really hope the whiskey industry will take seriously going forward.
What surprised you the most?
I don't know. I don't think anything surprised me, honestly. This was the stats backed up what we knew. I think maybe the extent of sexual harassment, perhaps. I've personally been inappropriately touched on several occasions, many occasions, and I couldn't count them. But that's just me. And I'm in a consumer-facing role quite a lot of the time. I didn't know the extent to which other women have experienced that. And I know it's not for everybody. And we hear a lot of women say, well, I've never been asked the question, do you even like whiskey? So to actually have the stat come back as 81% of women working in the whiskey industry have been asked, but do you actually like whiskey? While they're drinking whiskey, or while they're talking about whiskey or selling whiskey or doing their job, just proves the point that it is an issue. Just because you haven't experienced the misogyny or you haven't been asked that question doesn't mean others haven't. And I'm glad that we've now got these figures, because it's an argument we can have back. 80% have experienced that.
One of the findings was that 16% feel women are fairly represented in whiskey advertising and marketing. Women have been sexualized in whiskey ads for generations. And it seems that the industry is doing better about that these days, but there's still a long way to go, right?
There's definitely been a move towards making whiskey advertising more inclusive. There are some amazing brands that understand the importance of inclusion within marketing and advertising. 80% of household purchases are made by women. So if women don't perceive whiskey as a product they can buy or something that's for them, they're just not going to purchase it. But they are the ones doing the shopping. So if they see whiskey as something that they can buy that's something for them, which they're going to be influenced to through representation, they're going to buy it. Now, the representation also helps alleviate this perception of whiskey being a man's drink. And it doesn't have to be over the top. It doesn't have to be starting some kind of gender campaign, as one marketer told me it would be. It doesn't have to be that. By including women including women in a very respectful way, not sexualized, not objectified, you're turning the conversation around. You're just very subtly making people aware that anybody can drink whiskey. Now, what is important is making sure that representation is intersectional, because it's not enough to just have a couple of white folk drinking their whiskey and enjoying it. Make sure it's intersectional and we're actually representing a broad spectrum of people who can and do enjoy whiskey.
Interesting finding in here was that 26% of women in consumer-facing roles have been asked by their employer to change their appearance. That doesn't happen with men.
This survey didn't survey men. We only surveyed women. So I can't categorically say that men haven't been asked to change their appearance. They may have. the stereotype of whiskey drinker is a white bearded man. It might have been that a man has been asked to trim his beard, perhaps. You never know, but I can't speak to that. I don't know that. The reason why we included that statistic was we were asked to, when consulting on this survey, by a couple of brand ambassadors to include that question because they'd been personally asked to change their appearance. When I say change their appearance, a whole makeover, new hair, new makeup, new outfits, sexualized, and they weren't happy or comfortable with the way that they'd been asked to change. So they asked, can we include this question? Because it would be interesting to see how many other women have also been asked to change their appearance for their job. Whether men have or not, we don't know. But what we would like to do with future surveys is dig into this more. As I say, we created this survey just to get a few statistics for our Tales of the Cocktail presentation. We didn't expect the level of response that we had. We felt we should release these statistics, but I think future surveys will dig into a lot more of those details.
What do you want consumers to understand from this survey?
I would love anyone listening to this who is a whiskey drinker, male or female or otherwise, to understand that there is an issue within the whiskey industry in the way that women are perceived as drinkers and as whiskey makers. Understand it exists. Please don't brush it away just because you haven't necessarily experienced it. And I think the important thing to do is realize we all have our own unconscious biases. We're not aware of them. We walk into situations and make snap judgments about people based on the way they look, the way they behave. Now, we need to just be more aware of those biases. So perhaps if you go to a whiskey show in future and you walk up to a stand, or you go to a bar and you walk up to the bar, you want to know about whiskey. If in your mind you think, oh, I'll wait for the guy, just stop and remember that's probably just bias. That's rooted in the way whiskey's been advertised to you in the past. It's not your fault, but be aware of it and think, hang on, where's that come from? Let's turn this around. There's a woman standing in front of you. Ask her to tell you about the whiskey, because chances are she knows a hell of a lot, and she might even know more than the guy you're going to ask. I think the other thing that consumers can do is if you witness somebody, male or female, acting inappropriately towards a woman in whiskey, call it out, because it makes the world of difference to that woman knowing that other people around are aware that bad behavior is happening in front of them. They feel supported, protected, and are probably going to be more likely to want to continue in their job if they understand that everyone else around them is supportive. So call out bad behavior, make a judgment if you need to do it in the moment in front of people, or take that person to one side and do it privately. Call out bad behavior. It takes all of us to do something about this. It's not just about the organizations. It's not just about the brands. It's all of us individuals in the industry or as consumers. We can all play a part in making change.
We've posted a link to the survey's findings in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. And thanks to Becky Paskin of the Our Whisky Foundation for joining us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with the Uncle Nearest single-barrel Tennessee whiskey we heard about during the news. The ABV will vary from barrel to barrel, but my sample was bottled at 60.5% ABV. The nose is aromatic with touches of charred oak, black cherries, caramel, molasses, and a hint of leather. The taste is peppery and woody with black pepper, a hint of cinnamon, charred oak, and touches of black cherries, brown sugar, and caramel. The finish is long with gently fading spices and a touch of black cherries. I'm scoring the Uncle Nearest single barrel a 92. Next up, the Castle Camus blended malt from Mossburn Distillers. It's finished in Oloroso sherry casks and bottled at 46% ABV. The nose is peaty and phenolic with touches of grilled peaches, honey, and toasted vanilla. The taste is thick and oily with peat smoke and creosote, balanced by grilled peaches, honey, toasted vanilla, and a hint of figs. The finish has lingering peat smoke with touches of figs and grilled citrus. I'm scoring the Castle Camus blended malt a 92. And finally, let's look at the Hemingway Rye Signature Edition. It's bottled at 51% ABV, and the nose has touches of allspice, honey, molasses, and baked fruits. The taste has notes of cinnamon, allspice, honey, molasses, a touch of apples, and maple syrup. The finish is long with lingering spices and a hint of molasses cookies. I'm scoring the Hemingway Rye Signature Edition a 93. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,500 different whiskeys from all over the world at WhiskyCast.com. Our tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit, a 200-time award-winning Maryland-style rye whiskey. With a determined focus to create the best rye whiskey imaginable, Sagamore's team of distillers crafts each spirit with a nod to both tradition and innovation. Find their signature, Double Oak, Cask Strength, or Reserve Series rye whiskeys at a retailer near you. Just visit SagamoreSpirit.com. Please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. Two homes of horse racing. Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the WhiskyCast community app for this week's community segment presented by Waterford Whiskey. Ian Bruce posed an interesting question in the app this week. Has anyone recorded or measured the increase in whiskey podcasts, blogs, and vlogs in comparison to the rise of whiskey sales and how they influence each other? Elias Aoud responded with this. It's undeniable that more blogs, podcasts, influencers, etc. have popped up as whiskey has grown in popularity. I'd love to know to what degree those have had an influence on sales, although I suspect that's not something easily measured. My take, you're right, it's not easily measured, and I think that the rise in whiskey media has followed the trend in whiskey sales over the years. The world of podcasts, blogs, and vlogs has democratized whiskey media over the years and made it easier for more people to share their opinions with the world, but I don't think it's led to a direct increase in whiskey sales. Of course, that's just my opinion. If you'd like to share your thoughts, download the free WhiskyCast community app from the Apple or Google app stores and join the conversation. You can also find us on Threads, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is sponsored by Waterford Whiskey, where they explore the frontiers of natural flavor one farm at a time to create unique Irish whiskeys. Visit them on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. September is Bourbon Heritage Month, and we keep hearing about how a 1964 congressional resolution declared bourbon as, quote, America's native spirit. Turns out that wasn't exactly the case. As Reed Mittenmuller writes in his book Bourbon Empire, The Past and Future of America's Whiskey, all that 1964 declaration did was call bourbon, quote, a distinctive product of the United States. And all that did was give bourbon protection against foreign imitators. It wasn't until 1987, when Kentucky Senator Jim Bunning introduced a bill to declare September as National Bourbon Heritage Month, that the language America's native spirit was used. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the WhiskyCast community app to get in touch with us. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com, along with the latest news, my tasting notes, and of course our archive of episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Our free WhiskyCast community app is available in the Apple and Google App Stores, and you can always get in touch with us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at WhiskyCast. Of course, email's an option too. Our address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Find the new Dewar's 12-year-old and discover what all the awards are about. You can toast and thank me later. From Dewar's, the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition. Finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie. A climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2023, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.